I'd like you, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome to the stage Mr. Tirelo Dikeme, our Director, Mining. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuma. Good morning, everyone. Certainly not going to be easy during the opening remarks. We initially had wanted our Group MD to do us the honors, but be that as it may, welcome to Minet. I am pleased and excited to be here today opening this call forum. It's an absolute honor for us to be hosting you at Minet this morning. The topic of the day goes financial outlook of the coal ecosystem, and as Minet and Aon, as Africa's and the world's leading risk advisors respectively, felt it was very important that we host this workshop with Botswana's leading captains of the coal industry. This 22 specific forum is not a new initiative. It is mainly a follow-up on the same forum that we had in 2019 at Aon in Johannesburg with a few clients, some of whom are here with us today. For those who were not in the forum in 2018, we hope some of what will be discussed today will go a long way in assisting your respective business planning going forth, especially around your risk management strategies and ultimately insurance optimization. The 2016 Paris Accord on Climate, signed by over 200 countries, led to an agreement by most countries around the three main pillars, being reduction of emissions, building resilience, decreasing vulnerability to the effects of climate change, and most importantly, to uphold and promote regional and international cooperation. In a nutshell, the main resolutions out of the Paris Accord on Climate was to reduce greenhouse emissions, which lead to global warming. What initially was pressure on the leading financial institutions leading lending institutions being banks and other financiers to stop financing of new projects on what was deemed as unclean resources ultimately led to the that was deemed as unclean resources ultimately led to pressure on the insurance markets to stop offering protection for such expansions, either to banks and or developers. In 2019, some of the African leading insurers who had European parent companies took us through the various measures they would employ to either stop writing coal altogether and stop investing in the coal markets, and the period through which this would be done. Some were looking as far as 2035 as the period that they would stop participating in coal altogether. The COP26 summit resolutions of 2020, however, fastened the implementation of the 2016 Paris resolutions, which has led to some of the major African-based insurers who are headquartered in Europe disinvesting from coal faster than had been anticipated and what had been explained in our first forum in 2019 in South Africa. The objective of today's meet and greet is to mainly afford you, as our valued clients, the opportunity to get an update on where the African markets are, as we need to develop African solutions, mainly for African opportunities, what the future holds, and expectations from the markets on US clients, and how within these uncertain times, clients can navigate the challenges faced for the betterment of the communities within which they operate. This bearing in mind that we are a little over 6 weeks to COP27, which will be held in Egypt. This forum could not have come at a better time to engage again following on in 2019 with various participants in the coal ecosystem, being yourselves as clients, major insurers, and risk advisors to the various clients to prepare ourselves for any eventualities that may come out of COP27. As Minet and as Aon, we do not see ourselves as just insurance brokers, but partners to our clients in the delivering of innovative and relevant risk and human capital solutions, growing sustainable partnerships, and making a meaningful contribution to the communities we serve. We hope today's forum will be enjoyable and most importantly insightful, as we have tried to bring together the best minds within the Southern African risk and insurance markets to take you through the various issues on the go affecting the coal industry and offer various bespoke solutions that may be available now and into the future. We hope you find today enjoyable and most importantly insightful. Thank you very much for making time and being with us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tirelo. Ladies and gentlemen, just an overview of today's program. So first off, we have a speaker from Aon, Mr. Tyrelle. Correct, I can't read there. Yes. Correa, yes, Mr. Tyrelle Correa, Engineering Underwriters View. And then we do have a networking break at around 10:30. After that, we will go over the renewable energy to the... I'm not seeing there, sorry. Okay, yeah, Reinsurance Market Overview by Mr. Michaelson, Chonyera. Sorry. No, Renewable Energy, sorry. Cradle to the Grave by Mr. Michaelson, Chonyera. That went off. Okay, yes, and then we have Reinsurance Markets Overview by Mr. McAllister. And then we'll break for lunch around 12:30. Then we have at 2 p.m. once we come back, we have the coal loss adjusting by Albert Dibanet. And then we will have a property underwriting view by Vicente. I think they will be joining us online. And then we will have Mr. Gabriel Karidza presenting for us at the end. And then our closing remarks will be by Mr. Lemogelang Ebineng. Okay. Joining us next to present is Tyrelle Correa. He's joining us remotely. He will be presenting online. Tyrelle Correa has over 11 years of experience in South African insurance industry, working as a reinsurance broker at Naledi Reinsurance Broker, servicing large risks on the African continent. He is currently an engineering underwriter working for Mirabilis Engineering Underwriting Managers, located in Johannesburg, servicing the African market. We welcome Mr. Tyrelle Correa.
Okay, thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Tyrelle Correa. I'm working for Mirabilis Engineering Underwriters. We're based in Johannesburg. I'll just give a quick introduction on the company, what it is we do, and when it came about. So a quick overview, 2006, the company was founded, and in 2011, we partnered with Santam, which is the biggest insurance company in South Africa. In 2011, Santam also acquired the major shareholding in Mirabilis. In 2014, we expanded into the African and international territories. This is including Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia. An important thing to know is Mirabilis only focuses on insuring and reinsuring engineering risks and construction risks. We don't do property or liability. We are strictly engineering underwriters. In 2017, S&P, we got a security agreement from Munich Re of Africa. This allowed us to put A-rated paper behind some of the big risks we're on. And especially in Africa, you'll know that when there's lenders requirements involved, that the A rating is very important. So we got that agreement in 2017. And then in 2020, it changed to New Re, which is a subsidiary of Munich Re. And then last year in 2021, we became 100% owned by Santam. So there's no private shareholding as of 2021. So like you said, our offices are in Johannesburg. We have branches in Cape Town, in Durban, and one office, which is just a representative office in London. And our staff complement is around 50 employees. And our underwriting capacities in South Africa is around 1 billion rand. In Africa, we have 114 million on a PML basis, and that's in dollars. So in some insured, it's around about $300 million. And then international, we more of a follow line, and this is everywhere outside Africa. And we usually can only put around a max of around 27.5 million. Right, so thanks for inviting me to speak today. I think the first, when I first got asked by Aon to speak, I was very honored, and I think my mind immediately started racing. How would I package my coal experience as an engineering underwriter? And I mean, the first slide here is just the access to electricity. And whilst there are many types of coal risk today, I'm just going to be focusing on power plants really. And this is just a snapshot of the percentage of the populations across the continent who have access to reliable electricity. That's an important part. And as engineering underwriters, the level of development in country usually gives us a good idea of the type of infrastructure or construction that is likely to take place in the future. This map shows us a great need of power plants, transmission lines throughout the continent. And I mean, you can see some of the countries here are, some are below 5%, which is really low. I mean, if you look at South Africa's 94%, it's not too bad, but I mean, the further you go up, especially to Central Africa, you can see the need for power. And then this was just in the last 6 months when I was doing some digging. These are just headlines from the insurance and reinsurance industry and the restrictions that were put on coal and what we call in our office dirty fossil fuels. Because it's become such a swear word almost to even mention some of these things. So these are some of the big reinsurers, especially coming from Germany, a lot more in the last few months coming from the States. We've got quite a few also in France. And obviously these guys are not treaties, so whatever they say kind of has to trickle down to what we do on the ground. Right, so if you look at the coal production, so you can see here, this is in metric tons. And Africa is obviously a major producer for the global scale of coal. And when you look at it, Sub-Saharan Africa produces around 98% of the continent's coal. And this is, because it's so concentrated, and especially it's so concentrated in South Africa, you always also have to take the life cycle of the coal that's into consideration. I mean, things that need to be insured is the extraction of coal, which is the mining, it's the transportation, which is the marine side of things, that transports the coal from the mine to the processing plant. Then you've got the processing, and then finally you've got combustion. All of these processes or stages of the coal all have to be insured, and we're under a lot of constraints now, especially from our big reinsurers or our treaty leads, to step away from these things. And then we look at the coal reserves, and I mean, this is a very interesting slide, because when you're looking at the long-term viability of coal, we must evaluate that the coal reserves to determine the current rate of power generation is sustainable, or it must decline because of limited quantities. And based on the information we see here, you can see that it's apparent that there's more than enough coal reserves, with no immediate reduction in the usage because of this large reserve, especially in South Africa, Mozambique, and Botswana. As you can see, we have enough coal to burn for many years in the future. And I mean, based on these numbers, there's enough coal to last us the next 230 years, according to the reserves that we have. And I mean, it's also important to remember that South Africa and other countries, we have a very developed, extensive infrastructure around coal. I mean, these include the ability to efficiently mine coal. This it includes the transportation to the end user and to burn it to produce electricity. And I mean, all these investments and infrastructure, they represent an enormous expenditure of money, and companies will be slow to abandon this investment. So you can imagine that we can't just turn off our coal power stations tomorrow, because the infrastructure that's been put into place, the cost of running these major mines, these major power stations, they've been put in place for the last 60, 70 years, and they've been working for us to an extent. I mean, we can't talk so much on, I know South Africa has a big issue with load shedding, and those are different issues, but I mean, our actual power, we have the ability to produce more power if things are just maintained properly. On to the next. This is a conundrum we've been having. So, as you know, there's the war in Russia and Ukraine. It's put a lot of pressure on the European countries for the price of gas has just skyrocketed. I think the last time we checked it was 3 to 5 times the price in certain places. And I mean, we asked the question because we saw, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Germany opened one of their biggest coal power stations. They reopened it. And we asked ourselves the question, who's going to insure these power plants going forward, if not the big German insurers? If they're turning them away, who's gonna insure them? And I mean, this is a question, we don't have the answer to it, but I think it's going to be interesting to see in the next 18 to 24 months what's going to happen with these. Something tells me that the big insurer, Germany opened one of their biggest coal power stations. They reopened it. And we asked ourselves the question, who's going to insure these power plants going forward, if not the big German insurers? If they're turning them away, who's gonna insure them? And I mean, this is a question, we don't have the answer to it, but I think it's going to be interesting to see in the next continent that we find that the knee-jerk reaction has left us almost in the dark as to what we can do and what we can't do. So for us, like I mentioned earlier, we use 2 stamps. So we have a new Munich re-stamp as well as a Santam stamp. On the Santam stamp, fortunately, we can still write coal business, we can still do power stations, we can still do coal mines, but it's more on a referral basis, so it's not completely ruled out. So as Mirabilis, we can offer our Santam stamp, but unfortunately, with these big risks, the lenders agreement require A-rated paper, and we can't offer our Munich re-stamp because they have turned away from coal. So we offer our Santam stamp, and then obviously we are held by the sovereign rating of South Africa, which is BBB+. So therefore we can't offer our best security on these risks, but we can still write them. I know that we're going to be chatting about renewables a bit later, but I think it was important for me just to touch on these renewables, because as an engineering underwriter, we've been seeing more and more renewable energy risk come across our desks. I mean, from West Africa, we've noticed a significant increase in solar. In South Africa, in the coastal areas, wind has been quite a big number of wind plants have been coming up. And then obviously hydro as well in Central Africa, from Angola, DRC, we see hydro, not as much as solar, but yeah. And I mean, all these renewables obviously come with their own issues, but I mean, the main, ultimately getting power to the people in countries is what's key. So I think the renewable energy is going to be a huge space, especially in the next 5 to 10 years, for the power sector, trying to flush out all the coal power stations. Of course, it's much more costly. It's a bit more temperamental. It's not as reliable sometimes. I mean, if you have cloud cover for a few days, obviously the solar is not going to be as good. If you have drought, the hydros tend to not produce as much electricity. So we kind of look at the reliability as well. But I mean, as long as we're getting the infrastructure to these countries, it's important. And I mean, but like I said, solar is the most common type we have on the African continent, and we do about at least 1 solar project a week in Africa. And these range from, I mean, 10 megawatts all the way to 400 megawatt plants. The wind, not too often. This was just a slide that I already just touched on this in the slide before, but it's debated if solar or renewables is a viable energy source. It currently accounts for a very small portion of the total power generated. I mean, if you're doing it privately, like on a mine, just to service that, it tends to work well. But the larger scale solar projects, we don't have so much data. And I'm sure our next speaker, who's speaking later today, will be able to touch on it much more. But from our side, we're not seeing solar projects that are lighting up cities, for example. They still rely a lot on the traditional power sources. You know, they still rely a lot on coal or thermal power plants for them to really get a strong base of megawatts throughout cities, especially. And not as competitive. This was another thing we find, that like to have the solar or the renewables, it costs a lot of money. And on the economic basis that we have in Africa, it's just sometimes not feasible. The panels are expensive, batteries are expensive, the wind turbines and blades are really expensive. So the layout of money tends to be quite expensive. So we're seeing less and less of the renewables rolling out on a very large scale, especially in the poorer countries. And I mean, when you're looking at the long term, it's quite difficult to see how it's going to go. I still suspect that renewables will play a big part in private-owned companies, as well as smaller sectors of the private sector, but not as much as we're going to see in the public. Hopefully things will change, but every day we're demanding more from our solar, from our power grid, and it's just not as feasible as what it might be in the States or in Europe, where they have the capacity to outlay a lot of money to build really big wind farms or really big solar farms. And then, yeah, when we're looking at our long-term outlook for coal, I was sitting with some of my colleagues, and we're just discussing, and it's difficult to dismiss it as a source of fuel. It'll be impossible to just eliminate coal as a source of power in the next coming 10, 20 years, especially in Africa. And I mean, as I showed you the numbers, the global dependence on coal for a generation of electricity, there's not going to be a quick, easy fix, like some magic wand that we just wave and we're going to be able to solve our energy crisis. So I think coal will remain a leading fuel for the next generation or two. And of course, there's going to be hopefully more carbon capture technologies that will allow us to reduce the output of carbon dioxide, which is ruining the environment. Hopefully these things come from more of a technological standpoint and not just shutting off coal completely. And I mean, the electrical use, like I said, is expected to increase to meet the demands. And if we can't meet the demands with renewables, the reserve that we have is sufficient. The power stations we have will be sufficient because we have so many thermal power stations on the continent. And I think that we'll be seeing coal for the next foreseeable future. Obviously, it's just how we are going to underwrite coal is going to be a big part of our day-to-day underwriting. And as Miraculous, we'd like to support the power stations, the mines, all these big coal entities. We can't just turn a blind eye to them. So we'd hope that things change in terms of lead insurers and reinsurers being a bit more flexible as to maybe have an African guideline on how we should underwrite coal and not just totally rule it out. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm not sure if I can hear you, because I think it's muted.
Hi, Tara, can you hear us from this end?
Yes, Puma, I can hear you.
Okay, great. If there are any questions, I think, does this mic? Oh, yes, we've got mics over there. So if there's anybody who's got a question, kindly raise your hand and then we can give you the mic to to ask you. Okay, I think nothing from here, but I think with our guests that are joining remotely, are there any questions? If they are, kindly raise your hand and we'll allow you to ask your question. Also, Tyrelle, do you have access to the chat box? Is there anything coming up in the chat box?
I do have access to the chat box. No, nothing as yet.
Okay.
But I will be online for the course of the day.
Okay.
And then I can always just answer your questions. You guys also have my contact. You can share it amongst the delegates that are there today, and then we can always have a conversation if need be offline.
Great. Thank you so much, Tyrelle.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to break for a networking session now, and then when we come back, we will continue on with our presentations. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, as we continue with our program, our next speaker will be presenting on renewable energy, Cradle to the Grave, Mr. Michaelson Chonyera. Just to give you a background on Michaelson Chonyera, he has over 30 years of experience in the insurance coverage, underwriting, and claims management. He has a wealth of experience in the full scope and breadth of insurance and reinsurance and insurance strategy for large corporates in all industries, including tertiary education institutes. He is the managing director currently for Minet Botswana on the short-term and life business side, responsible for overall strategic and service delivery issues across Minet Botswana. He holds a Master's of Business Administration degree from McAllister, as well as an Associate of Insurance Institute of South Africa and a Fellow of the same institution, FISA. Welcome to the stage, Mr. Michaelson Chonyera. Thanks.
Yeah, very good morning to you all. Thank you for coming again. I will be presenting on, I don't know whether it's coming, on the insurance. We have created a new insurance product for renewable energy. The product is a composite policy covering everything that you can have, any risk that you can anticipate in that sector. So I will start by so I think it's insurance solutions are provided throughout all the stages of the renewable energy project, from the development stage through to construction and operation. So that's our product. It's a first in-country product that we are very proud of. If you look in the bubbles, it starts with the parametric solutions, which I'll explain briefly and a little later on, and also marine cargo, marine delays in startup, construction or risks, advanced loss of profits, third-party liabilities, and then we go to the operational risks as well. So in terms of the parametric solutions, our product, what it does is it provides coverage in two phases or two different scenarios. The first one is the solar protection. So it covers the fluctuations in radiation due to fluctuations in the solar radiation, and then if there are losses coming from then the policy covers that. Our underwriter that we are working with have got the capabilities to actually track solar radiation data in Botswana, and then so it's index based, and it's got it sets out in advance the payouts amounts, and then the other one is more like a derivative. That one covers fluctuations in prices due to insured events, things like, again, solar radiation or climate change. In fact, the policy has no exclusions. It pretty much covers anything that can happen. And the beauty about the policy is it's actually, it helps you, financiers and investors. They allow you to, this cover gives confidence to them to finance projects, because the parametric solutions close the gap between ordinary insurance and then the solutions it offers. So I'll explain a little bit more about it. So we've already issued the policy here in Botswana, and the client is very happy with it. So when I say composite, our product register, that's your Cradle, and the grave is where you get to the operations. So I'll just, what we've done, just giving you a quick overview of what we do without going into the perils, because then that would be a lecture in insurance, but what we do at each stage. So after the parametric solutions, we've given you that cover. We then have a product for marine, inland marine and transit. So it cover begins when the materials are first purchased through all the stages of transit, whether air, land, or sea, and up to the distribution warehouses. So now when you start bringing, I think some of our audiences are in this sector. So when they start, whatever company start bringing the equipment, the cover kicks in. And then the next stage we go to what we call marine delay and startup. So this covers anticipated gross profit and liquidated damages incurred as a result of delay in project completion due to the loss during the transit. So if there's a loss when the products are coming, and then the project is delayed, the loss of income will be covered. Liquidated damages are things that are in the contract. An example would be if there is a fine, or say you have a $1,000 per day fine for delaying the project. Those kind of things will be covered as well. And then after that, we go to the construction stage. We'll cover all weather-related events, including human error. We also ensure the physical damage to the equipment during construction. So this is really the construction cover. And then we move on to advanced loss of profits. This is particularly important for actually large projects where the delay in completion of the project will result in substantial loss of income. So that anticipated growth from the time the delay started to the time then the project commences. If there's any loss of income in between, that product will provide the coverage. I understand this is slow. Okay, I think I went too fast. And then after that, we go to the operational risk. So that's why we call this a composite thing. We're leaving nothing uninsured. So this is now when you're operating now from construction. So this is the normal fire covers that we give, weather related and all those things. So again, we didn't put the perils, just want to show you the stages. So that's where that comes. Then we've got also for the mesh plant itself, we cover mechanical and electrical breakdowns for sudden unforeseen failure of mechanical and electrical equipment, right up to testing and commissioning. Okay, and the early generation phase of your project. And then from there, then now that you're operating, then the business interruption, the loss of income, if there is any loss due to the perils we've spoken about under the operational risks. So the subsequent loss of income will then be covered. Also, we have put contingent business interruption. This cover, it provides loss of earnings of the project if the supplier, the business or subcontractor or key customer cannot continue to operate because of the damage and destruction. So you're also now covering, say you are providing cover to BPC, and then they can't operate and you lose income. This will also provide that protection. So, and then we go to third-party liabilities, which is your normal cover for liability cover for third parties, which I won't go into detail about. And then also political riots, key and terrorism, because this could be targets, this kind of projects. However, this is just my last brief on the parametrics. I think I've explained most of that. So, yeah, so basically this is, we call it a composite. It's really cradle to grave cover that we are giving you, or that Minet has created, and no one in the market has the product so far. We've sold, as I said, we have already got another solar project in our books in terms of the parametric solutions, because that helped them with funding and from the financiers. I will take questions if there are any. Yes, Lee?
Is it specific to solar only?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, it is not solar only, it's also wind. Yeah. It can also cover for wind damage as well. Yes, and renewables, but not coal. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Any questions? Okay.
Maybe a bit more specific. I don't want to get into the specifics. In terms of claims payouts, is it to the client or to the person buying the power from the client?
This is to the client, the insured, who is the person selling the power. Yes, thank you. I can take any questions, further questions? Okay, without any further questions, I'd like to thank you for listening. It was a brief presentation. I didn't want to make it a lecture in insurance, so I hope you got the picture of our composite cover. Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Our next presenter is Mr. Lee McAllister. Just to give you a background on Lee, Lee McAllister has over 20 years experience in the insurance industry. He's currently the executive head facultative at reinsurance at Aon, based in Johannesburg, South Africa. He is a chartered risk practitioner through the Chartered Insurance Institute of London, and also holds a bachelor's degree of arts from the University of South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Lee McAllister to the stage. Thank you.
Still morning. Morning, everyone. Okay, so whilst it's loading, maybe if I can just give you a bit more background as to what it is myself and my colleague Tiani Hlubi do. So we work for Aon Re within the facultative department, and our area of focus is finding insurance capacity for insurance companies. And where we tend to add most value is on your larger complex risks, your heavier exposures, whether that be coal, mining, coal power, general mining, or anything that's really large and heavily exposed is where we tend to add our best value. And my talk today, or my presentation today, is really around what we're seeing in the reinsurance space when it comes to coal, whether that's existing coal or new coal. So when I say new coal, I'm talking about new projects, new mines, new power stations, etc. How reinsurers are viewing, say, an existing coal-fired power station versus one that is being constructed or about to be constructed, and how some of them take different views. If you want to jump in at any stage of the question, by all means, happy to take questions as we go through it. Of course, we'll have some Q&A at the end, but please, if there's something, if you have a burning question and you want to ask it now, there and then, please just put your hands up, and either myself or Tiani can assist. So I'm going to go through a couple of topics today. So the first one is current state of play, how we see the reinsurance market at the moment, what it's going to look like, or what it could look like in 2023, how the global markets view coal versus regional markets. When I say regional, I'm talking about Africa, but I'm also talking about other regions on the globe. And then what we've seen in terms of client responses. What have some of the insureds, the owners of these mines, the owners of these power stations, how have they started to respond to the challenges of a coal risk? So the market is shrinking. I think a few colleagues have already touched on that. The market is shrinking, and it's continuing to shrink. And I think it's shrinking. It's growing with each year in terms of the number of insurers, reinsurers coming out publicly stating that they will no longer write coal business. Some markets are saying we won't write new coal, but we'll stay on existing coal. For example, HDI, they still write coal business, but they will not look at any new business. So when we look at Europe is a problem from a capacity perspective. All of the big majors have come off or are coming off of coal. So your Munichs, your Swisses, AIGs, Alliances, SCOR, they're all no longer writing coal. So when we talk about trying to get capacity out of Europe, it is a challenge. Lloyd's is still an option. And there are syndicates within Lloyd's that will continue to write coal in both new and old existing coal. However, they're coming under increased pressure. There were protesters, I think, that glued themselves to the front door of Lloyd's a few weeks ago, and that pressure is only going to increase as we go along. So Lloyd's can help, but is it the solution for everything? Probably not. The US markets, there are US markets and Bermudan markets that still write coal, and will continue to write coal. They don't seem to be that vocal about whether they shouldn't be writing coal. They just seem to continue to do it. Where we are seeing opportunities for more capacities within the Middle East and Asian markets. Asian being from India right through to China, Taiwan. All of those markets will still look at coal. Of course, it then can sometimes come down to the interests in a project. So it's fine to go talk to a Chinese reinsurer who can do coal, but if there's no Chinese interest in that risk, chances are they're not gonna help. But we're seeing that everywhere. And then you look at power, mining, and steel manufacturing. So steel manufacturing, I would say, is probably still the easiest to get placed. And markets are still more likely to write coal mining than they are power. Because obviously the power, you're burning the coal, whereas mining, you're just taking it out of the ground. It's splitting hairs, but that's what we've seen with some markets, is they're starting to pick and choose where and how they will write coal business. Right, so going into 2023, capacity, there's going to be a capacity crunch. Markets are coming off, as I've said, and markets will continue to come off, or they will also look to reduce their line size on a program. So they might be writing 20% of a coal mine this year. Next year, they might only offer 10%. Is there new capacity? Yes, there is. Is there enough capacity to replace all the capacity that has gone? No. So the capacity is shrinking. And of course, with shrinking capacity, pricing is going up. So we're seeing a coal account attract anywhere from a 20 to a 30% premium increase at renewal, just because it's coal, regardless of risk management. Of course, if it's had a bad claim, then you're looking at 50 to 60%. Now, we recently, last year, we renewed a very large power utility in South Africa, who had also had just come off the back of a very large claim. And we got it renewed, and it was 100% placed, but the premium was astronomically high, 60, 70% up. But there are markets that will write it. So the question then is at what prices is a client willing to pay for cover, or how do we structure the program to make it a win-win for everybody, so that the client is not spending an absolute fortune on very limited cover. Terms and conditions are tightening up, but I think that's a very general comment around what we're seeing just in general. Reinsurers globally, if you take into a combination of factors, what's going on in Ukraine, various Nat Cat events that have happened this year, most recent one being Hurricane Ian, reinsurers are very nervous. The Bondt conference is going on at the moment, and big issues around Nat Cat cover. So that, combined with the challenges of what coal is, can make reinsurers very, very nervous. And then, of course, there's always the ESG debate, and I'm not going to go into the ESG debate now. I think there's a topic coming up later on it, but it's something that the coal miners themselves are taking very seriously as well. We're seeing the big coal majors in South Africa doing some interesting things around trying to put forward an ESG pitch, whether that's developing their own renewables or buying renewable companies. I think there's a big drive there to try and do as much as they can in that space. So insurance, reinsurance rates. Coal is a hot topic. There's a shrinking market plus global inflation will mean there's increases on a program, whether that's a renewal or a new piece of business. Unless the client or in conjunction with their broker or the insurers, look to restructure programs, look at higher deductibles, higher retentions, the increases will come through. And so all of those factors combined doesn't make for necessarily a great story when it comes to your premium budgeting. But unfortunately, these factors are driving it. So, but it's not all doom and gloom. I don't believe. We've seen that we do need coal still. Global headlines you see going on around the world. Coal's not going away anytime soon. And the views taken by, say, your global reinsurers, your AAA rated reinsurers who've said they no longer write coal versus your regional reinsurers can be different. So there are South African insurers and reinsurers like Mirabilis who can write coal, but they're not A-rated. So they, like Tyrelle was saying in his call, he can't use his A-rated stamp on coal business because it's backed by Munich Re, but he can use his Santam stamp to write coal. So can a lot of other South African insurers. There are other regional reinsurers who don't necessarily have the A-rated paper, but do have fronting solutions with A-rated paper, which we've used in the past. So there's ways to get the right markets on, but it's a balancing act, and it requires a lot of time. So going into renewals now, we're trying to advise clients to come in earlier as possible, to try and manage any markets that are coming off, any markets that have got differing views, etc. So rating requirements, it's all fine and well to say we want A-rated paper on a program. But if a lot of A-rated paper is walking away from the sector, what do clients do? Do they then say, okay, we will accept certain B-rated paper, or what is the solution there? And these are discussions we're having with clients on a regular basis. So, what have we seen some of our insureds do? So we've seen some big coal mines self-insure their underground deductible. So underground sublimit. So effectively, they're only buying cover for above ground or open cast mines. How they're self-insuring that, we don't know. Are they keeping it on balance sheet, off balance sheet, through some sort of financing vehicle? I don't know, but we've seen it happen. And they've done it for a number of reasons. The premium for that underground coal exposure was just too much. It's just too expensive. It could also not get fully placed within the reinsurance market because it was a huge limit. So what they did is they elected to self-insure. It's a bit drastic, but I think with how they're viewing their sort of mid to long-term future is going towards more renewables. So it's perhaps the beginning of how they plan to transition. And then again, I did touch on ESG. So a lot of these coal mining companies have been buying up renewables companies or building their own renewable power generating capabilities. And with you may or may not have been seeing it in the media with the Just Energy Transition Program for South Africa, to try and get Eskom to start shutting down some of their older power stations. Komati's being the first one. And there's a lot happening around there in terms of how do you shut down the power station, but still ensure that the community is not just devastated by the closure of a plant. How do you support the people around the plant? How do you what could you do with that plant to make it sustainable going forward from an environmental perspective? So there's a lot happening there as well. We place the largest utility in South Africa. Each year it does get placed. There's no shortfall in terms of capacity. It's just a question of pricing versus the rating of those reinsurers. What are clients prepared to accept and not accept? And that's a discussion that you need to have early and before renewals, so that there are as few surprises as possible. Now, I don't have numbers as to which markets are still going to write coal and how much capacity is there, because in 3 months' time it could all change. More markets could come off. So from where we're sitting is we see accessing reinsurance capacity regionally in places like India, China, Asia, rest of Asia, certain US and Bermudan markets. That's where we see a lot of the capacity coming from going forward. The European market is I wouldn't say dead, but there's very limited opportunities there for coal business, and I think that's where we can add value. Is we take a global view, we have relationships globally with markets that we can bring to a program to try and get it home. So that was it in a nutshell. Any questions?
Somewhere that the Germans are resuscitating their coal mines because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So how does the insurance because we know that in Germany that's why you've got a lot of reinsurers as well, the big ones.
Yep.
Do you have any context on how that's going to play out in terms of insurance, or is something that just from a thought leadership perspective?
So I think what could happen with those mines is they will get insurance outside of Germany, or they will self-insure. They could very well just self-insure the mines, take a short-term view on the fact that they're not going to have the mines running indefinitely. But I think it'd be egg on their face if they now try and get insurance on these coal mines after trying to get a lot of people to wean themselves off coal. So it's a bit of a catch-22 for them. But it wouldn't surprise me if they self-insured.
Lee, at the last coal conference at the coal forum in 2019, two key elements came out of that session that were positive for our Botswana coal risks. The first one being BPC, in that the underwriters or the reinsurers that were there at the time acknowledged that BPC, whilst they were continuing with thermal coal power generation, they were also making a big effort on renewable energy options. And as we sit here, we saw at our resource conference earlier this year that of all the projects involving electricity in Botswana, 90% are renewable, but there is still 10% thermal coal, because Botswana is sitting on massive reserves. And obviously, as a country, they want to maximize on the coal prices.
Yep.
And also, obviously, the exporting and power generation is the way to go still for us in Botswana. And then the second element was that MCM presented a very strong scenario that the coal that they produce is very clearly what they call clean coal.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also learned that the majority of the coal that's underground in Botswana is clean coal. So with those two factors, that you've got entities like BPC that are pushing renewable but still have to rely on thermal coal, entities like MCM that have clean coal, and obviously with all the technology coming into play in terms of new filters and what have you for the power generation, through the likes of your office, they were taken as positive aspects for capacity and appetite to place their risk. Do you still see that there's that potential available in terms of the capacity issues, as well as the fact that we need the markets you deal with to understand that Botswana is a unique entity when it comes to coal and power generation and all that? Thanks.
I think it does make it a better conversation to have with reinsurers when you can tell that story. But sometimes when activists are involved, they're very unreasonable, and it doesn't matter how you could try and explain to them the story around what you've just told me, Bryn, about the clean coal, about investments in renewables, that you can't really get that across sometimes with activists. It's just it has to go. But there are markets out there that are reasonable. There are markets out there that we can speak to. Could I say to you that a Swiss Re would look at this differently? I don't think so. I really don't. But are there other markets out there? Absolutely. And we're trying to do something very similar with Eskom, with their sort of transition, is to see how can we get markets that looked at the traditional assets program and said we don't want to write it because it's coal. How can we try and get them back involved on the decommissioning side of things, where there is this sort of this transition that they're trying to do, and how can we get them involved there? But there has to be a bit of give and take. If they're going to get involved there on the greener side of things, they need to look at it as a whole package and still do the coal side of things. So it's a discussion that we are having with reinsurers, but it's a work in progress.
I think if you can really take that on board when it comes to the renewals and new, that'll be great.
Yep.
I just wanted to mention, just by coincidence, an interesting fact regarding the world and carbon emissions and what have you. At COP26, 193 countries signed up to their commitment to cut back on carbon emissions, coal, etc. As they prepare, I think they're a week out from COP27 in Egypt. Part of their commitment was to supply monthly reports on the progress they're making towards those commitments. Out of the 193 countries, only 27 have complied. And it doesn't include United States of America. So that gives you an idea of how complex and how contradictory this whole scenario is with coal, especially when you're talking about Germany resuscitating one of their biggest coal mines, and you've got Munich Re next door to the coal mine, for example, operating, that sort of thing. So I think from a reinsurance perspective, you guys in the forefront, it's going to be interesting to see how the world reacts to the reality versus the commitments.
Yes, and the knee-jerk reactions, how they will hold up as time progresses. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Nothing online? No? Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to have a chat to you. And we're around, Tiani and myself, for the rest of the day as well. So if you've got any other questions, we'd love to have a chat over a cup of tea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. We're just going to change around the program because we have like a lot of time on our hands before we break for lunch. So I would like to then switch over and ask our next presenter to be Mr. Gabriel Karidza on ESG. Gabriel has over 20 years of experience in risk management and asset valuation. He is responsible for all the risk management services, inclusive of underwriting surveys, program risk assessments, and training. He holds a Bachelor of Science honors degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Zimbabwe, a diploma in insurance from the National University of Science and Technology Zimbabwe, in conjunction with Chartered Institute of Insurance, United Kingdom, a postgraduate diploma in surveying, machinery and business assets from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom, and a diploma of fire science and fire safety. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Gabriel Karidza, our MD for Risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumo, and good morning. Okay. I know Lee has been talking about ESG, So I shall be talking about ESG in a more detailed aspect and in relation to extractives and also in relation to the energy industry. Okay. Just yesterday, I got an email into my inbox, and it was in relation to COP27. So these are the words that were there on that email, and it says, with COP27 less than 2 weeks away, now is the time to take stock of your company's climate ambition. The UN Secretary General has warned that we are in a life or death struggle for our own safety today and our survival. This moment calls for decisive ambitions, and the private sector is a key role to play. Right, and it was also talking about the net zero, that it's possible. Over 1,800 companies around the world now have the validated science-based targets, and over 2,000 have committed to that. So this basically, it revolves around ESG, and you can see sort of the pressure that the global world is pushing in terms of ESG. Obviously, going forward, we feel that it's probably not practical to stop coal, but it's necessary to focus more on ESG risks. It's necessary to drill deeper, put more information, do disclosures, and make sure that there is some management in terms of risk management that is done on the ESG aspect. And obviously with that, it would mean that as Africa, I think we are not really going to stop producing coal in the near future, but we need to do more in terms of these disclosures, and we need to push more and discuss more around the risks that are there. ESG has been identified as the top risk when it comes to the mining industry. This just relates to every mining entity, not necessarily just coal. So ESG is very critical on that. Just to give you insights and background in terms of why ESG is critical. When we say ESG, by the way, we are talking of risks that are related to environment, social risks, and also governance issues. Usually when it relates to the mines, what I know and what I've seen is that environmental risks are usually held by or managed by those that are under SHE, right? And the social risks may be there on HR, governance risks may be legal. I'm not sure why they are combined together. Maybe it means there should be someone who should be responsible for that, probably risk managers, title maybe, right? Because that's one of the things I think our mining colleagues need to look at and see who shall be handling them in a more coordinated way, because when you get to the mines, most of these things are in separate sections, yet it's imperative for each and every mine to produce ESG risks, ESG reports, and manage this risk in a more detail. So just insights. The highest temperature in 2021, 54 degrees, that was in California in the USA, right? It happened there. It's not just by coincidence that these things are happening. Climatic issues, and we know ESG risks they relate to climatic issues, right? The floods that are happening in all the Germany, Netherlands, China, and of course getting closer homes. SA, Durban, there were those floods as well. 600 people died, I think, a few months back in Nigeria due to floods. Of course, there is some relationship to a dam that was opened in Cameroon, but again, it's linked to ESG risks, the climatic changes, right? In Botswana, even closer home as well, the highest number of wildfires for Botswana, it happened this year, right? In Africa, we've got challenges in terms of governance issues. All these things, these are insights that I'm putting so that we see where we are going in terms of ESG risks, right? the global electricity generation is predominantly fossil fuels. I think we spoke about this. But renewable energy just contribute 8.2% of the global total. This is the Lancet report. I think it was being discussed even yesterday on CNN, on BBC, everywhere, right? So I went through this report, and it's a report that came out just now. 8.2% out of all the total. That alone, I think it gives you a perception of where we are going to see how difficult it is to replace these fossil fuels. It means about 92%, close to that, it's non-renewable throughout the whole world, right? And it's even, when it comes to replacing of these in Africa, it's even a more challenge, right? So over half of all coal power stations that are being built currently, they are in China, right? Although China has stopped funding these power stations outside China itself, right? So when it comes to this, no wonder Lee was saying the Chinese, in terms of insurers, they are still taking this risk. They cannot stop because they are even building power stations. More than half of these, they are still in China, right? Then with that, nations are expected to make firm commitments to the Paris Agreement. Right? This is what they are expected in the next few days. I think there was a meeting in Nigeria of some lawmakers that was for Africa, where they are planning what the position that they shall take when it comes to the COP27 that is happening in Egypt on the 6th of November, right? About a week away, right? So they wanted to come up with a firm position regarding that, and I think African nations, they are just saying there should be some funding or some commitment from the developed countries, where in a basis that they call the loss and damage agreement, where they say these developed countries, they resulted in significant pollution compared to African countries. So because of that, they should also fund in terms of the transition to clean energy, right? So in the next few weeks, we'll see what position they shall take, right? Because Africa is responsible for about 3 to 4% of global emissions, yet it's home to 17% of the population. This is the African Development Bank, right? The report that they produced, it also highlight this aspect. So you can see that 3 to 4%, that's in terms of pollution, but the population is 17%. So what that tells us is that when Africa says maybe we are not really the biggest polluter, there are those that are the big brothers that are more into this. And that's why Africa then pushes for this loss and damage agreement, getting into COP27, right? Then also Africa attracted just 2% of the world's clean energy investment in the last 20 years, just 2, right? And that, again, it's a big issue that we need to look at. So we are talking of transition to clean energy, but this investment so far is not coming. 2% for the last 20 years. It means the investment is somewhere else. And looking at what is happening in the Russia-China war, people are moving investments into the developed economies. Money is moving out, and yet we need the investment. So where is the gap? What are we going to do moving forward? We also need to do our part on disclosures in terms of ESG risks. We need to do that because you find that most of these companies that are in Europe, they've got more information that is online, disclosures and all this. As in some instances, you find that the clean energy investment, we need to do more on that and get more information out there to be able to attract that. And when it comes to net zero by 2050, we are just saying, is it achievable? When you say net zero, obviously we are not saying we should stop producing coal. Net zero is sort of replacing whatever is being fed into the, if it's carbon that is being fed, is there something that is also taking out that carbon, right? So you find that there is the difference between net zero and not producing at all. So there's still some significant work even in terms of that core. That's why, again, Lee was talking of clean energy, where core companies, they are also getting into renewable energy. It's more like in line with this net zero. And when it's done in such a way that you are producing clean energy as well, maybe you are consuming some power through non-renewable energy, you also invest in a similar amount of whether it's megawatt that you are consuming to allow for a replacement of whatever you are producing. It's critical, right? And another key note there, 70 billion US per year is required for Africa until 2030. So every year, close to 100 billion to be able to put in renewable energy. That is just enough for a quarter of our needs, right? That is the IRENA report there. So with these are insights that I wanted to highlight so that at least we see how probably difficult it is to replace our coal. Yeah, if we need about 100 billion, but that investment is in Africa, it's not even coming. It's coming as 2%. And these numbers will show us that we need to do more within the African solutions, develop African solutions to our challenges that we have, right? In Kenya and South Africa, there are those green bonds. I think South Africa got about 200 million rand from the African Bank on these green bonds. Same Kenya is also advanced in terms of those green bonds as well, right? But having said that, there are those statements like intense pressure on fossil fuels from the UN General Secretary, right? So we have a society in Africa that is poor, but we are endowed with rich mineral resource. So this calls for a response to ESG risks in an impactful way. The need is so glaring, right? So Africa's situation way forward, ESG disclosures, self-insurance that, again, Lee spoke about, and opportunities in these risks. When we get highlighted to say, okay, we are into coal mining, we are all this, that attention itself, I think it also allows us to have those opportunities that are there. If we are to venture into disclosures on ESG, venture into renewable energy, the attention will be a bit more because we are already known for producing coal. So it's an opportunity actually. So these are the ambitious targets that we have. Last 7 years, these have been the warmest ever throughout that have happened. It means global warming is happening because the target is 1.5 degrees. That's the goal at the end of the century. That's by 2100. But emissions are off target. Countries are not meeting that. Bryn mentioned that before, all right? So you see that emissions are supposed to be reduced by 45% by 2030. But as it stands, we are likely to get to 2.1 to 2.9 degrees Celsius by 2100. Our Botswana target, I think it's about 15% below the 2020 levels of emissions. So that's what we aim to achieve, right? So you find that with the targets that are there, companies are not achieving many of those targets. Countries are not achieving them. And even if they achieve, we'll still be, I think, at about 1.8 degrees by the end of the century in terms of temperature rise. So countries are ramping up fossil fuels, right? Oil and gas companies, I think I was also reading that Lancet report as well. which was saying, in fact, the Lancet report was actually saying we are at the mercy of fossil fuel companies, right? And they were sort of attacking or setting the base for next week at the COP, and we anticipate that it's possible there might be other people striking again. I don't know. It might happen because the push to come off fossil fuels is getting high, right? Then now the ESG trends, now getting into the trends that are happening, right? About a third of the funds are now they will be linked to ESG by 2050 to 2025, right? So out of all the funds that are there within the world, about a third will be linked to ESG. So it means that if we focus more on ESG, we are likely to have access to cheaper funds, right? But having said that, 80% of the governments, those that are producing fossil fuels, they are subsidizing companies that have got fossil fuels, right? And they say that subsidy is actually even higher than the health budget of about 31 countries that have been looked at, right? And the subsidy in terms of this, I think it was in 2021, about 400 billion US was used to subsidize fossil fuel companies. It shows that coal is still being produced, right? So on the way forward, I'm not going to talk about the insurance side of things because I think Lee has already mentioned that. And the status in Africa now, the abundance of coal in South Africa and Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. We saw the numbers before on the presentation. In terms of the numbers, there is still some abundant coal that is available. We've got oil and gas in Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Uganda as well, right? We are heavily reliant on this extractive industry. As long as we are mining, there is also ESG risks that are linked. You are mining, there is the land rehabilitation that has to be done at the end of it. So we have got a lot of extractive industries. So ESG is topic on these industries. Power generation is primarily coal powered in SA, in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, right? It's probably close to 90 or something percent there in those countries. However, we have got countries in the East Africa like Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda. Even Zambia is in a better position in terms of renewables. These countries, they've got a higher percentage of renewables. Kenya is actually about 85%, right? Kenya has got a lot of geothermal there, and some hydro. Kenya is, I think it doesn't have a big challenge when it comes to power generation, replacing with the renewable, because it's almost all renewable as it stands right now, because it has got a lot of geothermal energy, right? So these are the countries that are better off. In the Southern African region, it's a challenge, right? So what are the trends? Because I've been talking about ESG, which we need to focus more on, which we need to do more on as the mining entities, as coal mining. We need to focus more on these disclosures. We need to do more. There are a lot of things that are covered under ESG, and there are a lot of standards and frameworks that govern this. There is the framework that is related to the accounting, to the CFA in the field. There are the global reporting standards, GRI. Then there is the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, which is the one that many of these companies now are more into in terms of disclosing and there are many other sources. So I will talk about the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures because I think there are about probably 34 regulatory and standard bodies covering ESG, but the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures is getting more attention. And in terms of that, it looks at related financial disclosures. It came in 2017, right? And the companies provide information, especially in terms of to support informed capital allocation. And also these disclosures are very necessary because they are even becoming inputs into the insurance underwriting, right? So while we have been focusing on property damage, business interruption, when you come to your minds, we used to focus on those, you realize that our attention, we are also focusing on ESG risks. We are focusing on what we are doing within the community, the environmental issues around the tailings dam, and all the other things that are related to the social risks aspects of managing a coal mine. Right, so the disclosure recommendations are structured in 4 areas because this is in line with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It looks at issues of governance. Governance is the overarching aspect of managing ESG risks. Then the strategy of the company, how it's linked to those ESG risks, risk management and metrics. It's very necessary to have some measurement of these risks. So what is it that we are using to measure ESG risks? So we cannot just say we are managing our ESG risks or put in there disclose without any measurements that are in place. Because if we do that, they call it greenwashing, where you are appearing like you are doing a lot in the ESG risks aspect, yet you are not really doing a lot. So it is necessary to have some measurements. So you see here, governance is the outside ring there, strategy, risk management, and the metrics that are related to ESG risks. And this is in line with the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures. So as you look at your ESG risks at the mines, this is one of the frameworks that is very critical, and it's something that most of the companies that are getting into ESG risks they are guided by this framework, right? And right, it is necessary to demonstrate all ESG initiatives, especially on projects, targets, strategies, and third-party ratings. So all those aspects are very critical, right? And this is not just for fossil fuels, although the TCFD, it says continued use of fossil fuels is identified as a risk. This is one of the focus areas for the TCFD, right? So although disclosure is recommended for everyone, including clients that are not fossil fuels. So you as fossil fuel companies, you need to do more on ESG risks disclosure. Mining risk, I indicated that ESG has been identified as number 1 in terms of this. There are lots of reports, various global risk rating that identify the top mining risks, including even accounting firms. The Ernst & Young, I was reading a report, Ernst & Young report for 2022. It also identified ESG as the top mining risk, right? So if it has been identified as a top mining risk, I would take it that it's an area that we need to really focus on, all right? So a company that puts more attention on ESG, it's also likely to achieve sustainable performance. These are some of the rating tools that are there, all these Moody's and all these, and the Sustainalytics, Standards and Poor, Global. These are rating agencies of ESG, right? So the Minet Aeon solution now, when it comes to ESG, what we then do, like I indicated, our team of risk engineers, we're predominantly property damage and business interruption, but we are now focusing more on ESG risks. And we help you to align with global practices, especially to manage those retained risks. We obviously, with what is happening, there is no doubt that we shall unintentionally, as mining clients, retain risks. So the push that will be coming from COP27 will result in, and even the coming out of risks of the European underwriters, it will result in the mines having to, whether by even not necessarily by choice, they are going to self-insure, they are going to retain more risks. So us, from the risk management aspect, that's where we come in and we manage, or we work with you in terms of the retaining of the risk that you shall, whether you like it or not, but it shall come in advertently because of what is happening in the global world. So things like creating of funds or self-insurance and all this, it requires serious risk management for it to be a success. So a holistic approach, again, cradle to grave in relation to managing risks that mining clients that you guys shall be faced with will be in a position to solve that. And these are the things that we'll be looking at under environmental, social, and governance. So we do gap analysis when it comes to ESG risks, can produce reports that focus on those pillars: biodiversity, cleanliness, green energy, and all those things. Something like this. On the environment aspect, supply chain practices, land rehabilitation, energy saving. The engineers, when it comes to your energy, even issues that relates to energy saving, when you are producing power, what you do in terms of, just as an example, those power factor correction units. Sometimes when you do that, it then needs to be translated into how it relates to ESG, and we'll be in a position to help you. I know you do a lot of things that are beneficial when it comes to ESG, but the way it's packaged, that's where we come in and help you in terms of packaging those, because we easily identify where it's linked in terms of ESG risks and the savings that you do on the energy aspect. So when you put in all the power factor correction units, all the things that you put in the plant, they are related to ESG. Projects that you invest in, tailings the management, all the drills, the management that you do, coordination with the community, that interaction with the community, it's part of ESG. It has to be packaged. So some of these things you might be doing them now and again, but it has to be packaged and disclose it out there on your websites. Everything, disclosures are very critical. So we can come in, we look at all these things, we package for you, we produce a report that you'll be able even to put in the key aspects of it and disclosures. There are some portals of various companies. I think there is NBI that is based in South Africa, CDP, the portals that are there where you can publish your disclosures in terms of ESG, right? Then waste reduction, even issues of saving paper, water management, the way you are saving water, electricity, I have already spoken about that. It's part of the E aspect of environment, which I know you will be doing all those things. Growing trees, for example, very critical. I know around your tailings them and whatever, you focus on land rehabilitation, vegetation, and all this. It's very critical, and even in terms of decarbonization, management of carbon, right? Management of emissions into the atmosphere. You find that those are very critical for ESG, but they need to be packaged in a way that really talks to even your communication department. They have to be aligned to the things that we are doing at a mine to be in a position to package ESG risks, right? The social aspects, just quickly running through. Diversity and inclusions, women in critical positions, right? At your plant like MCM, our engineer ladies that I'm looking at, and the other one who is not there. I don't know whether that has been packaged as the diversity and inclusion, women on key positions. It's very critical. So you might have all those things, but what I'm not sure of is it packaged to be able to address that. So as we say, we are having challenges in the coal mining industry. You realize that in terms of ESG, maybe you are doing a lot, quite a lot, that to capture the eyes of those that are within the global world. And when you package your ESG response or ESG report, you realize that maybe you are doing quite a lot, and your risk becomes people have an appetite of your risk, those that are in the global world. We are probably not just communicating to them. Talent management and inclusion, employee engagement, safe working conditions. You see, safe working conditions is the social aspect of ESG. It has to be addressed. Customers, suppliers, and community engagement, the CSR that you do, the cycling that you do in the mines, all those, it's part of ESG. Employee wellness, work-life balance, labor management, right? And also the aspect that I think I put in there a question, does net zero result in loss of jobs in the fossil fuel industry? So while we say we need to replace all these fossil fuel, but what will be the future after they have been closed, right? So it needs to be looked at. So some of those things, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to move away from fossil fuels. Maybe the impact of that closure, if a mine is really probably sustaining the whole village, you find that you can package the way it is very critical to that whole village in terms of job losses and sustaining other aspects of it, and as part of ESG. The community donations, even the apprenticeships that you offer to graduates. Okay, last aspect, governance, which is usually overlooked, yet it's very critical. Global data, ESG, about 57% of ESG executives that were asked by the global data strategy, they did not rank governance as one of the critical factors, yet it's actually, you see it, it was the overarching aspect, it was very critical. The ethics outline that you probably have, very critical, it falls under the G aspect of ESG. These are things that you probably have, but they need to be packaged again. The integrity, risk mitigation, governance practices that are there, your board members, again, if they are maybe ladies in there, diversity and inclusion within the board members, it's also very critical. Then adherence to business conduct standards, right? And if you have got, let's say, I put in there, let's say, cyber risk. Cyber risk is quite topical these days. Maybe you have got a critical response to that, and it's also highlighted within the board, or you are publishing it that you have got a key solution or key response when it comes to cyber risk, right? If that is published out there, it can form part of ESG risks. And you realize there are so many ways that you can manage the cyber risk. Even our broking team is here even to get a solution when it comes to that. So maybe you've got all these things, but they are not really packaged. So the issue is, how is ESG integrated in the whole company strategy? Thank you. Any questions, any comments regarding ESG? Okay. No questions. Or maybe online, I don't know. Oh, yeah.
All right. I tend to to believe that the E aspect of ESG is taken more
Yes.
than the S and the G. And as you said, probably we need to package the whole thing better. Because I believe, in terms of coal, a coal mine employs so many people, but then you have solar power. It doesn't need a lot of people. So So in a country like Botswana where the unemployment rate is high, is it the right thing to do at the moment? Maybe the answer is no.
I agree with you, Pelo. The E on the ESG, I think even surveys have highlighted that the E is usually more the focal point, and yet there are other aspects of it. The governance aspect is very critical, yet the E is the one that is usually more given that attention, right? And our challenges in Africa might not be the same as those within the global thing. For us, the S is also very critical. The social aspect, we have got a lot of a poor society, which puts the S into a very key position. That might not be the same thing when it comes to European companies. So while there is talk of ESG, we need to highlight that we need to focus more even on the S. We need to focus more on the governance aspect. So I totally agree. Even that G alone, it's not just about emissions only. There are other aspects of that E, the environment aspect. There are other aspects of that environment aspect, right? You find that while we are talking of clean energy or movement from in terms of emissions, we are saying electric cars, let's use less of power and all this. But that nickel and the cobalt and all those, they are also mined. There's an aspect of rehabilitation that is involved within those mines. So it's still mining. There is the environment aspect. So what I just want to highlight there is I agree with you. Sometimes probably it's done in a selective way where it appears to be harsh to the coal mines, yet the E covers a lot of other things as well. Okay. Online, any question? There's a comment. Huh? Sir?
There's a comment that came up.
Can you?
From John.
Oh, okay. Can you? I can't see from here.
I think one solution code is going to be.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's fine. I have it here. Okay, sorry. We had a comment from John Mawere. It said nuclear risks are insured through nuclear pool vehicles. I think one solution coal miners should consider to overcome this dilemma is to consider setting up an insurance mutual company or captive arrangements, etc. I think this was directed towards Lee. If maybe you could, maybe Lee, if you could comment towards that. Yep.
I think there has been talk in places like Australia of setting up coal mining coal pools, insurance pools. I think there's been a bit of backlash to it as well because, again, the sort of your environmental activists are pushing back against it because it's not getting rid of the coal concern. But I think, and this is just my own personal view, is that coal could become like tobacco, where it becomes a self-insured entity, and it will be concentrated in a few areas as more and more insurers and reinsurers take a different view to it. So I think it's something that people have thrown around, but I don't think it's actually taken off.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are supposed to break for lunch around 12:30, and then have our presenters come in at 2. So I was thinking maybe we could just take an opportunity of just a 15-minute break for you to check on your emails, to have a leg stretch, and then lunch will start at 12:30. It will be served outside. If you do wish to join the Wi-Fi, it's open. It's called Call Forum, so that you can be able to maybe open your laptops and check on any meetings or anything that is pending officially. Yeah. So we'll meet for lunch outside at 12:30. For now, we're on break until 2. Thank you so much. Albert is a specialist of loss adjuster at Lloyd Warwick International South Africa, specializing in large and complex claims in the mining, construction, corporate, manufacturing, and chemical industries. He also handles complex multidisciplinary root cause investigations, as well as data analysis and interpretation specialist. Albert holds a Master of Business Administration, University of Witwatersrand, a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the same university, and he is also a chartered chemical engineer from the Institute of Chemical Engineers. He's a professional in chemical engineer and a HAZOP facilitator. He has over 12 years working experience. Kindly welcome Mr. Albert Bondt to the stage, please. Thanks.
Yeah, afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, nice to see you all. I think I've had the privilege of chatting to a few of you, so thanks. It's good to be in Gaborone and in Bots for the first time. Pretty much the same sun and humidity as the Lowveld in SA, so I can't complain. But it seems to be a lot more calm here than in SA at the moment, so it's quite a welcome change. It's a pity I'm only here for one day, but yeah, it's been nice to reconnect with some familiar faces. I was actually in the background in the 2018 conference, so I do recognize some faces, but in any event, it's nice to be here, so thank you for extending the invitation, and much appreciated. Yeah, and thanks for the introduction. Maybe we can start with the slides. I don't know, how does it work? Do I just... there we go. Excellent. So, I was asked to talk about coal loss adjusting, and I think the best way to do it is to introduce how we go about claims, certainly from our side. I've done quite a few coal losses, but certainly within our group there are others who have done more coal losses. Coal is definitely a significant player still in the South African market, and definitely in the Botswana market, and certainly in sub-Saharan Africa for the foreseeable future, in my view, which we'll get to a little bit later. So what I thought was just to give you an introduction into how we see the loss adjusting and claims management process for large and complex losses. And I'll just give you two loss cases which we've done. One was damage to a continuous miner underground. So that's the pillar extraction method of coal mining. And then a loss of export coal sales due to a damaged railway. So that has interesting policy implications and so on. And it's a risk that's not often thought about until it actually happens. And then the bonus is the interesting facts. I was asked by Tiani just to see maybe if there was some interesting things I can add. I've already heard in the background with some of the previous talks that there was mention of the Paris Agreement and all that, so I'm not going to go into that because I think it was covered certainly in detail by some of the others. So maybe just kick it off on claims management process. I mean, when we get appointed on a claim, the first thing is let's get the site secured. Securing the site often just means, when you get that phone call, let's just make sure everything is safe, make sure basic things such as the electrics are isolated and the plant is all switched off and it's safe, that people can actually move in and so on. And sometimes, depending on the loss, this can be a few hours and sometimes it can be several weeks. Often what happens in South Africa is that if there's an incident on a mine, there's a government document that's issued that prevents you from doing anything else further until you meet certain requirements. So that's all part and parcel of securing the site, I think. And I think after the first meeting with the insured, and hopefully the brokers as well, just to set the scene on where we're going in terms of this claim, just a quick preliminary investigation, because we find that if we wait till much later on in the claim to find, the golden goose, to find the final answer on what exactly happened in this loss, and whether it's machinery breakdown or fire or floods or whatever the case may be, it really just delays the acceptance of the claim, which is something I'll get to just now. So, and then the next thing that's very important is we find that if we get buy-in from the start, and we say to the insureds, look guys, let's sit around the table, let's formulate a project management team. Who from your side is going to be the custodian, the champion of getting this going? First of all, managing the immediate reinstatement, getting the investigation team together, appointing the independent experts and that sort of stuff, so we can work together. And something as simple as just setting up a single contact person is really good. And a recovery plan, if there is already ideas on the table, then that's great. We find often that in these meetings, you only have either risk people or only plant people and so on, and you often have insureds who have some big teams behind the scenes, and they all should have an opportunity to implement or be part of formulation of that recovery plan. So that can be anything from, we flooded our pit, what can we start thinking about doing? These are the resources we have available. And then it's going to take some time to determine the extent of damage, and then obviously quantify that. Basis of indemnity is so important, and I've seen it in one of my claim examples. New replacement market value, depending on what the policy wording is, are we going to go new, are we going repair, and what are the timeline implications on the business interruption? It's so important, especially on the mining, when you've got large equipment that's long lead items and so on. And that's, of course, the business interruption loss, which is your critical path. So what is going to set how long my business interruption is going to run for? Is it going to be how long my pit is flooded for? Is it how long my machine is going to take to repair, or what the lead time is to get a new one? And BI mitigation plans. Increased cost of working is available. Additional increased cost of working is available. But generally, you can spend 99 cents to save a rand, then insurers will buy in on it. The point is, what can be done to mitigate? Can we send stocks another way? Can we mine from a different shaft? Can we do different exploration? In the meantime, can we use an older machine that's maybe been decommissioned, etc.? And to work with the insured in that project management team, to appoint contractors and consultants. Most mines and businesses, in fact, are not in the business of dealing with disasters, because that's what when there's a claim, it's a disaster. They're in the business of doing their business. And often we see industrial blindness. We see that these guys are exceptionally good at what they're doing, but they don't necessarily consider all the outside options. So we'll often just recommend some people to work with, or ask questions on who the service providers are. And many times we'll have those consultants also report into us and into the insured on a very open basis, unless we think there's going to be a contentious issue. But it just saves money and frustration for the insured. And yeah, getting acceptance of the claim quite early is important in principle. If we have a simple fire, and the fire was caused by nothing that's excluded, and there's no funny circumstances around it, from our side, we certainly try and keep everyone happy by getting a quick prelim report out. We don't need to do a forensic analysis into it. There's no need to present, to provide forensic reports from fire investigators if it's something that's quite obvious. So if we can go back to insurers and say, yeah, this is what it is, and they accept, or we have a market meeting with them, so that by the time we get back to you, we say, look, guys, they've accepted liability. That already creates that comfort, and it creates a sense of, okay, we're working together on this thing. And that flow of information is a touch base, and a dynamic and a proactive way. If it's necessary to meet more often, then do so. It's not just necessarily on a calendar basis. In the beginning of the claim, we find we often meet on sites once a week or once every 2 weeks. and later on it becomes once a month, once every 2 months as things are going. But it's that first bit of the claim that's really critical, and that's where a lot of the decisions matter so much in terms of the business interruption. And I think critical path, looking at, there's an opportunity to get a continuous miner, let's say, we can borrow it from another mine that's using it, that's not using it. That's an example of mitigating a critical path, continuously managing that and re-reviewing it and thinking about it. What have I done here? Oh, there we go. So, and then negotiating claim settlement, that's right at the end, obviously. But so there's quite a lot that goes into this process that happens behind the scenes. And generally, from our side, we try and split up our reports into digestible chunks because we fall into the trap to try and get all the answers, and it just takes too long. Right, so then the critical factors in large and complex claims, no adjuster can adjust a claim if they don't understand the business. If they don't understand the business, if we don't understand the business, and it's impossible that we understand all businesses, we'll go and spend a day or two there and walk around the site, meet the people, see what they do, look at their production, look at their production flow charts and so on. Look at the flow. The flow of information is so important, as I mentioned earlier, and we want the insured's buy-in to the process. We're there to establish facts, we're there to assist, we're there to advise what insurers have available in terms of increased cost of working and whatever else is covered by the policy. It goes without saying, managing expectations, very important. All right, so the first one, and I'm not going to go and read this all out, but the first one is quite an interesting case. This is the one with the railway damage. So this is in February this year. The Transnet freight rail, which is used in South Africa to rail our export coal to Richards Bay, there was a bridge that sustained damage, and Transnet freight rail said, well, we can't deliver your coal now. We can't take it across. So this is what we had. You can see this is the water causeway, and this tow embankment just collapsed completely. So from the other side, there's no way a train with thousands of tons of coal is going to get across that. So what then happened? Well, the insured got together with all the other local coal producers that were using the same line, and they said, guys, we're not going to wait around for Transnet freight rail, because the reality is if we do that, we might be 3 months or 6 months down the line. And they appointed some contractors with the buy-in of Transnet, and they spent about 350,000 rand to do it. And this was back up and running and available for railing the coal within 3 weeks. So, and that's when the allocations of the trains could recommence and they could start getting out coal from the sidings. So just give you background, this operation, they mine coal open cost, and then they do the sizing and the washing and classification, and then they take it to the sidings ready for export. So this was the repair, and back to normal, right? So the claim in this case is because we had no problem with our open cost mining, we had no problem with our processing facility, but we couldn't get our product to Richards Bay, and we couldn't get it out of South Africa, and therefore we couldn't recognize a sale. So it's not a loss of production, it's just a loss of sale. Insured also couldn't mitigate the loss. The insurer said, well, what can these guys do? Why don't they put on a truck? Well, so they lost 4 trains. Now there's approximately 6,300 tons of coal that can go into a train. So it's 25,000 tons of coal that was lost opportunity within that period. So generally what this business does is they do about 40,000 tons per month, so 6 or 7 trains per month. But if you had to do side tipper trucks of 34 tons, you'd have to put almost 1,200 trucks on the road, and it's just simply not feasible, not possible in South Africa. If you see how full our roads are, the capacity of trucks that's there, and then the port constraints as well. Richards Bay, for argument's sake, is not actually equipped for receiving coal by road. So increased cost of working, not a thing. And this is why the insured went and sorted this thing out themselves. So if we look at the valuation of the loss, just to give you an idea, they lost 4 trains. That's the carriage capacity. So they forfeited, and it's a pure loss sale, by the way, because the allocations that happen are there for that insured, and it's gone. You can never catch that up again. That's why I said earlier, these guys do 6 to 7 trains per month, and that's their allocation. So next month they can't get 14 trains. And we value that, let's say, at different prices per ton. So I'll reference the dollar price later, but this loss could, if it was at, this loss was at around 2,500 a ton, I think. But I mean, look at the sensitivity of that. At the coal price, at 3,000 rand a ton, 75 million rand. At 2,000 rand a ton is 50 million rand, and that's a lot of money for a very short period. So insurers must have been really happy that these guys made a plan. So how did this claim get paid? There was no damage to the insured's property. There was no damage to the insured's premises. But luckily, they've got specific extensions under their business interruption policy. So extended premises. And there were two avenues we looked at. I'm not going to go into the detail, but part of extended premises is loss or damage as insured, not excluded, and including railway lines, railway yachts. So this was a railway line that's not part of the insured's property, and there was physical damage to it. So that ticks that box. So they actually have cover under that. Or alternatively, under denial or prevention of access, there was a radial limit in this case of 100 kilometers, and this was well within the 100-kilometer radius. So this one says preventing or hindering the use or access. So that was the other option. So it depends. Sometimes they have different deductibles, a time deductible or pure monetary deductible. But in any event, if they didn't have this cover, they would have had to take this loss on the chin. And just to give you an idea, the green is the local price in rand. That's the price they get from local buyers, and the blue is the export price. Now look at what happened in the loss period. So insurers weren't happy about this, because when they did day one basis declaration in March 2021, the budgets were talking about, we think there's going to be a coal price of around 1,500 rand a ton, and then we just had this massive increase over here. So in February we were looking at almost 3,500 rand a ton, and it's just carrying on going up. So very interesting on export there, and there's some nice interesting graphs at the end I'll talk to. Are there any questions on this loss specifically, or can I just move on? We can take it at the end as well. Okay, cool. So continuous miner, I've just pasted in from my report, but really this is a machine, continuous mining machine it's one of these guys. So not really small. Here they cut, and there's a conveyor at the back, and they run on trams. And it was operating at night. It was cutting a pillar, so a certain section of the mine, one of these pillar areas over here. And basically the machine didn't want to work. So there was an alarm. The electrician went, he checked it out, and he said that he's struggling to restart it. So there's some sort of electrical, mechanical combination failure of the machine at that time. And because of the time that's passed, and because of the way the pillar extraction mining works, the gulf, as they call it, was imminent of that panel. So that means they normally mine that section and they move on to the next one. So if we look at this over here, they'll just mine a pillar and they'll move on to the next one, and then that will collapse behind them. But in the time that passed, just was no longer safe for these people to be there. And you can't just haul this thing out. It weighs hundreds of tons. And they decided they had to abandon it for fear of life, etc., which is the reasonable and the correct thing to do. And what happened? The gulf happened, and this miner was buried. So and there was nothing unusual about the gulf. It's not like they were operating the machine and something happened and as unintended, or they did bad rock engineering processes. It was really just, if you think about it, it was almost proximately caused by firstly electrical or mechanical breakdown of this machine, and them not being able to access it. And in this policy, there's a provision for inaccessible property, and I think it's good underwriting. It says that if you can't access this property, then you'll be indemnified for it. You're not going to be forced to go and retrieve it, because to retrieve this, you've got tons and tons of rock from above, and it's just not practical to get it out. So these guys were entitled to a new one, or replacement one. So we look at what options did we have. Well, there's a couple. Let's see. what did they have? They had this Komatsu 14HM15. So a new one, no, we can't get a new one, but there's not the exact same one anyway. And we can't source a refurbished one. And this is an interesting thing with when you have specialized equipment. It's not a shelf item. It's not a 45 MVA transformer or a ring gear or something like that. You are going to struggle to get hold of these types of things. And especially when coal prices are good, everyone is using their equipment. They're sweating their assets. So now we start looking at that BI, that time implication. And as it happens, they could get a new one with a lead time 12 to 14 months at a cost of 44.5 million, 45 million basically. And because they knew somebody who was in the business of refurbishing and they had just received an old one from another customer, there was a refurbished one available within 3 weeks for 30 million. So that's really lucky. And I'll explain to you on the next slide why. And then we had the Sandvik, which is a different machine. I mean, my picture was a Sandvik, but anyway, this was a different machine. And you know, in terms of reinstatement basis, you're entitled to something with the same capacity. So we don't go and quibble. But at this stage, it's very, very important to be talking to the insured and talking to the broker. And you know, we have to scribble to get reports out to get acceptance of liability, because now the decision needs to be made. This ship is going to sail, and then insurers are stuck with this. And it's not the price difference of 15 million rand that makes a difference. This is the difference. 12 months reinstate is almost a 250 million rand claim. And we had the 3 weeks, which is 10 million rand. So that difference, and it's almost the luck of the draw. It's almost how resourceful can you be? You're not going to keep a spare miner. In this case, they didn't have a spare miner. They were using all at capacity. So they showed us that the bottleneck of their sales was production. So they'd been using all of their machines. So this is a typical calculation that we do to work out loss of revenue. But just to illustrate to you how important that decision making, that mitigation of the losses. In this case, what was interesting is they were able to mine from a different pillar, because if we go back, this area now had collapsed and there was material that was unmined there. So you would have been able to mine it in certain areas, but it's now collapsed, and that machine also no longer has access to the rest of the panel. So therefore, it's unmined metals or unmined materials, and that's not insured property. But they were able to then go and mine at a different area, but then you need to look at the difference in grades and that sort of thing. So I think those two examples of losses, just a little bit different from your standard ones that we look at. I mean, on the open cast mining, we see flooding, and we see some machinery breakdown and fires with yellow metal, breakdowns on RDTs or ADTs and that sort of thing, excavators. And then, of course, you get your massive ones like your stacker reclaimer loss. There was in South Africa massive stacker reclaimer losses at a massive coal mining company that, you know, their losses were in excess of R1 billion. Just the sheer size of those machines. But these are a little bit more intricate, and I think what I'd like just to impress upon this audience is that just to open the horizon, or open the field of view into what else can be looked at, because these are scenarios that can be real. I don't know what the situation is in Gaborone or in Botswana in terms of export. If you export coal, maybe it's a conversation we can have afterwards, but how do you get it out, and if there's a way around? In this case, in the previous example, there was no other way to get the rail out. Even if there was a way around, those slots were already booked, so the rail can only take so many at a time. So it makes it quite interesting. Right, so the third part, I think I'm well in time here, is some interesting graphs, and this might touch on what some of the other speakers have done, so maybe just to supplement what they've done. Now, I know what it says here, but I know you can't see it necessarily. So this is total greenhouse gas emissions from energy per product in the world. And this is to date, and I can't see now what this is. It's like 10 years or something. It's like, I think it's about 10 years ago, but the blue is coal. So of our total greenhouse gas emissions, we still have a linear increase, and a lot of it's still coal. That's important. The coal is still here, no matter what anyone says. Electricity generation by source in South Africa. Surprise, surprise, coal. All of this mountain over here is coal. You're not going to change this with any target realistically in 10 or 20 or even 30 years. I think the appetite by insurers to move away from coal in South Africa certainly is potentially misplaced, because this coal has to be insured in some other way. Total energy supply. So energy and electricity is not always the same thing, but energy would be burning coal for boilers to make steam and other production operations and so on. Surprise, surprise, lots of coal. We have some nuclear there in that green. We've got a little bit of natural gas. And there's straight oil and so on. That's heavy fuel oil, bunker oil, that sort of thing. And then renewables and all of that is sitting down there. So this is the reality that we're in South Africa. Aside from what the Paris Agreement is, we have other reasons why we are where we are at the moment. Now, I borrowed this from another presenter who presented with me at a different conference, and he talked about it, calling the coal cliff. And I'm not sure if this has ever been updated. This is about 2 years old. But what this is, it's our coal-fired capacity in South Africa for power stations, and it's increasing our capacity from coal-fired power stations. So that's Kusile, Medupi, etc., and doing some refurb work on some of the others. And so I think that's these. But then there's a phased out approach. So these plants over here, so these are all our major coal-fired power stations that give us our power and electricity in South Africa. These guys are not all going to be switched off at the same time. Some of them have been built earlier, some have been around longer, some of them have reached end of life, some of them have had new leases on life. But this was the best case scenario, the earliest, on the basis of Eskom's planning, that we were going to come away from a lot of our coal. So what is that? That takes us to 2045. And if I remember correctly, Paris Agreement talks about 2045 or 2050 or something like that. So we still have that 10 or 12 odd gigawatts that's available, and then we still need space for growth. We need space for policy development. We need space for renewables, all of that. So coal is here to stay on the coal cliff. Levelized cost of electricity, credits on this is International Energy Agency, IEA.org. Very, very useful, exceptionally useful website. If you want the details, just email me after this. This is based on a big average of the members of the IEA, and it looks at the cost of fossil fuel technologies versus low carbon technologies. It's not so clear cut yet. Coal is over here and gas is a little bit low, and that's sort of median and then high and low percentiles, but coal's still coming in pretty low. So for developing nations, it's not always just a no-brainer just to go straight for renewables. Nuclear is here, but it's got its risks, and then so I think some of the other delegates spoke about renewables and so on. It's something that I really like. That's solar residential, so we can ignore that. But levelized cost of electricity just means how many US dollars per megawatt hour it costs. So that's an all-in cost. It's the plant setup cost. It's the life cycle cost, the variable cost, and I think the transmission and distribution cost is excluded here. Something like hydroelectric is over here. So hydro can be cheap or it can be very expensive. So yeah, coal's still sitting pretty decent at the moment. And if you don't have to import it from somewhere else, I mean, we've seen now in the crisis overseas. I just heard a ping on the Teams, but I think we'll wait till the end. So what I was going to look at is the API4 price assessment. I've just taken this from a website that talks about how these things work, because I didn't actually know about this. But when looking at that export price on that claim, we had to look at this because this was the contractual value. So the contract refers API4. There's another one, API2. But basically, it's the average of the price assessment at Richards Bay. And they're saying it's a pretty good indicator of what export coal is like from South Africa, which might be a proxy for Botswana. US dollars per ton, so hovering around here, export price. And here in my claim, of course, insurers were not so thrilled, but they paid because they had good cover. They had a one-day basis declaration. So even though their costs stayed the same, the price went up, they got their claim paid and was good broking. So this is what's happened. I mean, that's a massive increase. And I think some of us might know what the ideas for that were, which I'll get to just now. And these are the forward curves of API 2 and API 4. API 2 is the Rotterdam or Netherlands price, I think, and then API 4 is the one I've discussed. So at the moment, the forward curves was just saying that we're somewhere around here, and we're saying that it's going to remain the same for the foreseeable future. Just the summary that I've obtained from the same site is that they talk about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it seems that a lot of Europe was extremely dependent on natural gas, which is a little bit hypocritical, I suppose, because they also have members of the Paris Agreement and so on. It is just as bad a fossil fuel, or as bad as coal, with a few exceptions. So they've gone back to some coal-fired electricity, and they've restarted some plants. So I think anyone in this room who has shares in South African coal producers, some of your big guys, you'll see that coming through in the share price and the dividends. So current status of coal. Coal share of total global generation has rebounded. Europe is a big user. America seems to be out of the press. I'm not sure what's actually going on there. But this is definitely not on track on where we are. And I think it just adds credence to the reality of the coal industry in the world, and the reality of economics. We've had COVID. We've had economic changes. We've had the Russia and China. Sorry, not Russia. The US and China. We've had issues there previously with Trump administration. And now we have all this flux in the market with the war and whatever else could be next. So on that, I mean, I'm not a coal salesman, but I still think it's still going to be around for a while. And I would be surprised if in 20 years we're still not adjusting coal losses. So I think I'll end there. Thanks very much. If there's any questions, I'd like to take that now. Como? Was there something? Was there nothing? Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, then thanks everyone. Good to be here, and happy to connect after this. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Albert. Next we have Mr. Vicente da Silva. Just to give you a brief, he's the portfolio manager for Emerald Risk Transfer. It's an underwriting agency fully owned by Santam Insurance. Emerald is a short-term underwriting agency focused on corporate and major property risks. Vicente has been with Emerald Risk Transfer for over 14 years, doing property underwriting. Now, Vicente is going to be joining us remotely. So I don't know if you are there, Vicente. Kindly unmute your mic and you may turn on your camera.
Hi, good day. Yes, I'm here.
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks. You may carry on.
Hi, good day, all. Sincere apologies. I don't have a presentation. I have some technical issues, and apologies as well. I have some slight challenges with my internet connectivity, but I will try to do just a verbal discussion on the presentations from the property side or from the underwriting perspective, based on the risks that we do underwrite within the teams at Emerald. So in short, I'd like first to start is really, thanks for the introduction. I'd like to do a slight introduction of Emerald, who Emerald is. Emerald is a property underwriter as part of Santam. Emerald was founded or created in 1999 and was purchased by Santam in 2010. And since then, we made part of niche underwriting specialists. How Santam is structured, Santam has various specialist business which we fall under, like we have Mirable, which one of my colleagues has presented earlier. We have HHA that does the liability, and we as Emerald risk transfer to the property risk. Within Emerald, because we write on Santam license, then we enjoy the Santam security stamp, which is the BB Plus, because of sovereign rating. We do, in addition to that, have a facility with NURI, which we do have the ability to transfer or use a NURI stamp, which is a subsidiary of Munich, where then there is a requirement to any risk that would require a rating paper. We do then have that ability to place that risk within our own office, and that is used on the A-rated paper. Bit more about Emerald, our territorial scope, where we do write business. Currently, right throughout the whole continent, including the sanctioned countries, which are Libya and Mali. Appetite for risk as underwriters, we do, of course, mining, surface and underground. We very much predominantly hold ourselves the leading market within South African space, and to a great extent within the continent. We do write as well a lot of power generations, let it be coal or hydro or even renewables, heavy manufacturing or heavy engineering. So those are the key stuff that we do look at as part of the corporate or the niche or specialist business. That is about Emerald. Now, on my discussion that I'd like to have, I would like maybe to point a couple of things as a trend that we see in the market. And the main thing that I would like to bring upon is really the difference or the varying terms that we do see a lot between direct markets. When I mean direct markets, comparing more people in the region or in countries writing the business direct, and any need for insurance markets or insurance placements behind those placements. So there are a lot of varying terms, varying conditions, and varying premiums. So I will start with the main trend, which the direct player that we do in SA, we see. The trend we are seeing now is due to the past 5 years adjustment or correction in rates. We see that markets or clients are pushing back the increases. So a lot of the increases are being pushed back, and one needs to be reasonable in a sense to understand how the account has ran, what's the loss ratio, what is the policy of the client in respect of risk management and so forth, and as well the need for the client in respect of capacity that they do require for the risk. Now, on the other hand, we are seeing a different approach for the reinsurance, and those reinsurance, I will divide them into two, which then you have your primary insurance that will write a smaller line in a primary placement, and then the XO markets, which normally don't have appetite to lower layers, and they want to play slight above MPLs, and they use that more for capacity. And those two segments, there are a lot of varying issues that have been quite difficult for the past 2 years, I think, for the direct markets that do require, when they do write call, to place those with reinsurers and the changes that are coming from there. So in addition to that, then the pricing, then with the things that Lee alluded earlier, and some of the other presenters alluded earlier, is really the investment from the call from the European reinsurers to a greater extent, either by gradual investing or then putting a condition that no new coal or no new mining with coal exposure or any coal exposure type of risk will be written by them. So that has created a trigger primarily to the reinsurance market, but still write it. And I'll start with the primary, like the Lloyd's market, company markets. They still do write, and like uh, because they're really specialists on that, so their pricing is corrected. They have corrected many times, and they continue to correct because they do use that tool because it's a primary capacity. The primary is a premium security, and therefore there is a price to it, and we do have that understanding. However, the game changer really on the margins for the direct market, we see it coming from the XOL markets where then their correction hasn't stopped, and we see more and more those corrections actually even are starting to become more expensive than the primaries that traditional used to be cheaper. So then we have that issue. Then we have the issue of jurisdiction. So we have the issue of jurisdiction because we're seeing, look, there, Europeans are disinvesting. The Americans really participate as and when they feel fit, but then you will have a full blown entrance of a new market, which is the Asian markets, which really they're available, they're willing to support. Yes, they're still pricing correct because I think depending on the quality of the risk, the size of the risk, they would have seen and they'll have an idea of what the correct price is for wherever the exposure is. However, as a direct market relating to SA space, when we do experience those, is it comes with another three challenges that we do face. One is regulatory by our prudential authority in SA, where if a risk is placed with a reinsurer that is not part of our list of jurisdiction countries, then that reserve doesn't get transferred, and then that remains in our book. The second one is really, and I think Lee, when you get a chance, maybe you could comment, is the chicken letter that the reinsurance brokers know that for some extent they're unable to assess the accounts of that specific reinsurers, and they then issue us with the chicken letter, which then it becomes a quite hard compliance issue that we have to do by signing it and delegating it to the market. So on the direct side, say I'll touch on the issue of pricing again. And I will relate it to an example of a couple of accounts that we've worked together, which I'll just mention them and then probably just to get some context. Like accounts like Eskom, Exaro, Kelvin Power, which that is the power, is an old power station in SA, some coal power stations in Morocco, which is Safiek and Kakwa Morocco, Kakwa Ghana. So when we see those accounts on direct side, due to the relationship with the client and the adjustments that markets did when Paris Accord was signed, and markets then corrected and anticipated the depreciation or reduction in coverage or capacity coming to the market. So the segment, mining, coal, was corrected, which was corrected gradual, and rightly so. So direct market now, due to that relationship with the clients, what we're facing now is that challenge that any increase has to be negotiated and has to be considered. Yes, we're probably having a good end of the year where the resources prices have shot up, and maybe, yes, the Russian and Ukraine war has helped the price to increase, and maybe their balance sheet for the coal producers have strengthened. But probably that will affect the power generation operations different, because depending on the deals they have with the mine to supply the coal, we might have then a quite increase in costing because of the increase in the coal pricing. So you have that demand. However, we as underwriters, we see a challenge to pass costing to the clients because the clients are pushing back. The primary market, however, still adjusting it, and on the recent renewals that we did see in our book, we saw increases ranging from 50 to 100% in rates, where as markets, then what you do is a key account. So what you then do, you subsidize some of it. Basically, it buys out on your margins that you do have on your accounts. One needs to be very much engaging with the client because of those challenges that we do face. The XO markets as well, they go ahead and do the adjustment, very much aggressive, and the XO markets are the one area that is twisting the crypto to the extent, because primarily previously you could see if you have, let's say as an example, a 50 million policy last limit, you buy a primary at a price of 2 million, and then your XRO perhaps of let's say of 10 million, excess 10 million could come at 500,000. However, now we're seeing that those markets are adjusting their exposure as to the primary, where they're correcting it to the extent where the increases are massive. And because as well, they have the ability to still rise. So it is a premium capacity. So we're seeing those trends that are really affecting the market, so it's becoming a challenge. And I think those are the things that we have really to be on the lookout. So it means early submission, early market. If you do require some capacity on the reinsurance market, you need to be early, you need to be engaging, and you need preparing as well the client to the feedback that one would get. I don't know if I'll stop here for now. I don't know if anybody has any question or anything that you would like to ask. Hello, I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, there's a question over there. Can I please have the mic?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, there's a roaming mic. Thanks. No. Yes, just you. Thanks.
Hi, Vinny, it's Albert. How are you?
Hi, Albert. Good, thank you. How are you?
Good, man. I was just actually wondering, in the coal space at the moment, with Transnet's challenges and so on in South Africa, with capacity and deterioration of the rail and so on, does that have an impact at all on the terms that you're placing with these insureds that are doing a lot of export and that rely on the rail and the ports and so on, and that sort of thing, and maybe flowing on to all the unknowns that is happening with what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, but predominantly with Transnet Freight Rail? Is there any effect or discussion that gets had at negotiation or renewal there?
Definitely it has. I think one of the things that most markets in our space are doing is due to that exposure to reliance of mine to Transnet, Eskom. So there is a tightening of the loop there, because as markets is an underwriter, then quantifying that exposure, the accumulation exposure is quite massive. So I think the approach there that we've been using is either excluding certain exposures, either will be if you treat it as utilities, or then restricting the cover on that. But I guess the market's still learning how to adjust those exposures, because those exposures have become quite greater to us on the corporate space, because I mean the reliance, for instance, of Transnet to carry the goods of the mine industry within the country or the region is key. So for us, the main thing for now is really restricting coverage in respect of certain incidents, or taking out if there are really massive exposure of accumulation for us. So that is really the approach that we can do, is quantifying it, and if you're uncomfortable, either buy out by perhaps finding a reinsurance arrangement that can then provide us some support in order then to provide the cover and mitigate our accumulation exposures to those risks. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, he says it's all right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Vince, Tirelo, Minet. I've just got a quick question. Maybe it will be in sort of three parts.
Okay.
Trends that we are seeing from the market since the beginning of the year have mostly been around the deletion of the extension for non-damage BI. So the question that really I'm asking is, one, is this because of influence from the local markets getting RI from the South African markets? Is it a South African trend or it's a global trend? Two, what is driving this across? Is it because of COVID, or has the South African markets been hard hit by claims, particularly for that extension? And then the final one, just looking into the future, is it something that's here to stay permanently, or with time you look at trying to get it back on? And most importantly, if a broker were to ask for it, how flexible would you be in giving such cover? So maybe it's something that I should have just asked through Lee's presentation, but I just remember it's been an ongoing issue for a while now. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think that is one of the greatest challenges we had. And I think it really comes primarily from COVID experience. South African space, after COVID, really had a challenge because some of the wording like clarity, and we did give the cover then. And although the intention was not to provide cover for pandemic, country lockdown, so that coverage was somehow with different intentions. However, our courts, even the international courts, have rules against the insurers and reinsurers in respect to that. So then what that triggered then the reassessment of the non-damage incidents that primarily are given into the assets program, because traditionally South African markets have a wider coverage than most territories. And I think it comes really to how the maturity of the market and how competition has been very strife for many years, and where our competition commission or even our regulator took away some of the previous old markets agreed wordings that we did have. So our wordings are quite wide. So what then our risk committees have elected to do is actually going into assessing the contracts that we have, the coverage that we do, and primarily non-damage. And I think the scenario that was created mainly was one of the scenarios that is really primarily affecting SA, which is the ESCOM scenario of a grid collapse. So the risk committee have identified that as one of the key issues on the any insurer or reinsurer due to the accumulation, should there be a grid collapse for a number of days, and then what will be the trigger or the response for all the placements that we have. So that created then that, look, there is an exposure here, and you need to be uniform to everything you do, in a sense where if there are a need for coverage for non-damage, and you know that there is no accumulation, because the main thing is to mitigate accumulation. The reason why those are being taken out, because you could have an incident like the previous gentleman question that asked. We have key railway lines, that Transnet operates, and we know they carry most of the mine materials to the port. Should they have an incident in one of the critical lines, then you know you have, if you insure a multitude of mine accounts, then you may have then accumulation exposure for that. But that is insurable if that incident is due to a damage event as insured under the policy. But if it's not, then it becomes even a greater issue, because now we have identified that most of our contracts had some non-damage exposure that could trigger an accumulation. And in order to mitigate it, so then we are removing it and only providing really coverage for damage events or damage following incidents. I don't know if I answered your question or if there is anything else that you'd like to ask.
The trend going into the future, is it something that's here to stay? If a broker were to ask for it, is it something that can be considered or not?
I think the consensus for now, I think following the recent, I think it will be something that, because the markets have learned and the lack of clarity in contracts was not there. And I think maybe it's premature now, people to do, provided if it's to give it, probably will be a limited coverage. I think there could be consideration for it depending on the needs of the client. And if your contract then is ratified and you have shown the intention to want to give, it could be given, provided then that either limited or then it's identified that there are no accumulation exposure to those cover.
Okay, thanks.
Is there anyone that has any other question that would like to ask?
Vicente, is there anything that you're seeing on the chat box, or is there any hands that are up online?
No, there is nothing on chat box or online. There's nothing here that I can see.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Now, I just have to conclude. Maybe I just probably conclude. To conclude, sorry about interrupting you. My apologies. Then for me to conclude, I think that the takeaways I would have is really four items that we foresee continue to happen in the coal market. One of them is really the limited capacity that the market will have. So I think those accounts that don't require excessive or large capacity might get away, provided the price is right and provided that those risks are retained. The second one as well, the pricing will continue to increase, and I think this is going to be a tough one to adjust, depending on the needs of the client and perhaps on the time one has been paying on that risk. If there are that relationship, and increase has to be gradual, but new reinsurers or new insurers tend to be quite aggressive on the correction of pricing. The third one is the ESG. I think that framework definitely is coming, and that will have an impact as well on some markets continue to operate. And if we are able to operate, still will come with some additional conditions that we will have to comply with, or some additional tick box that we will have to introduce into our rating tables, our appetite guidelines, and really the retention. Lastly is the retention of the client, which I think that clients need to start being prepared on their balance sheet to see either they become a co-insurers in their own program, or increase their deductible, or increase their retention, or create a captive. And those are the trends that you have to see, where clients need to start preparing themselves for the possibility of them being required to take a bigger share of their own risk. Yeah, that will be my takeaway, my conclusion point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vicente. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program for the day. I'd just like to say, please don't be in a hurry to leave. We do have some refreshments after this and networking. And I'm just going to welcome to Mr. Lemogelang Ebineng to come and give us the vote of... Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, okay, yes.
Sorry, Kumo, just having heard Vicente talk, just reminded me of a question I just want to ask Lee. Lee, with the current status of reinsurance restrictions and on capacity and that, and what we've discussed today, I recall some time back, captives were the key solution, and then they seem to ease off a bit. What is your take on are new captives being created at the moment, specifically to provide solutions like on some of the subjects we've covered today, or is it still very much the same as what we've been experiencing the last 4 to 5 years? So these are new captives for multinationals. Thanks.
Okay, so I think new captives are being created by the bigger mining houses, but I think a lot of these bigger companies already have their own captives. They've had them for years, and I think what they're doing now is they're using them more.
Rejuvenating.
Yeah, rejuvenating or using them more. So, for instance, that example I mentioned to you earlier about the client electing to keep their underground sublimits in-house is probably sitting in their captive. And then there could be protection on that somehow. But I think we'll see more and more of that. Whether we get to, which we spoke about earlier, about coal pools, remains to be seen, but given the kind of backlash that the public could bring to it, I think clients will have to turn more and more to their own captives.
And geographically, historically, Mauritius, Bermuda, are there any new areas emerging for captives?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it's all the usual places: Isle of Man, Jersey.
To Lee, mainly on new projects that are coming in, and especially from a financing point of view or financiers' expectation point of view. Are we seeing the same sort of lenders' conditions that are as onerous as your normal mining risks, expansions, developments, and so forth? And is it better than what we've experienced in the past? Just so that maybe we start having conversations about how it is that this can be managed for future projects that are going to have African solutions, if I can, Africa, India, regional market solutions, as we had alluded to earlier. Thanks.
Well, look, I suppose the first question is can the project attract the right amount of interest from lenders? Are there enough lenders out there to finance it in the first place, given what banks are saying as well around financing new coal? So I think it is still onerous. I think it's tough for new projects to get adequate backing. And I guess similar to Bryn's question around captives is the bigger companies are going to have to maybe look at doing it in-house, if I can say, because the request usually from lenders, and you know this as well, Tyrelle, is that they always want A-rated paper. Now, given where coal is, the amount of A-rated paper available is shrinking. So how are you going to get around that? We've worked on projects in the past where there has been a waiver to allow a certain amount of B-rated capacity onto a program, and you could well see more and more of that in the case of coal business.
I think just to add to what Tian just said, I think regulators need to really to get involved and maybe collaborate with regulating other countries, because yes, A-rated paper I think is shrinking, is going away, and I think coal will have a challenge if there are any lenders that do require for A-rated paper on their finance in order to support it. It will be quite difficult to achieve. And definitely as well, even though we may be able to use the Asian reinsurance, but the challenge we have there as cedents as well is non-equivalent jurisdiction, where then we probably have to preempt and start doing the necessary legwork to have the necessary approvals to have them agree or approve to our panel, or access being considered into the aggregated pool that one can use them and still enjoy the protection that require all the capacity required from them.
When we met last time in Joburg, around that time there was a lot of talk about maybe moving to zero carbon emission and those kind of things. Lately, you hear a lot of even in the West, you hear a lot of people talk of net zero. What are the implications for people who want to be insured when now people talk a lot about net zero?
Vince, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I can comment on that query. Look, the implications are dire for a continent, for a region. I think we still have to be responsible, and those risks need to be insured. And I think the reliance on A-rated or Europeans, we need to understand we need to self develop to be able to insure those risks. However, we're still going to have pressures because remember our financial system is dependent on a lot of investment from the Europeans, the Americans. So those regulations still going to affect us, but we need to be able to have those discussions to see what would be the solution because we still need to utilize coal. We are dependent on coal, and will be for many years, as the past presentation showed. I mean, the facts are there, but I think we just need to discuss as insurance what will be, because the possibility is we may have in the near future, because our treaties are primarily placed with European insurers or reinsurers. There could be a possibility that one day they will say, look, on your treaty, you're no longer allowed to do anything because they have to comply with whatever place their countries have agreed to the Paris Accord. And it is still going to impact that. So it's up to us as local or regional players to come with a solution. But we need to engage. We need to actually engage with the regulators amongst ourselves for a solution. Waiting, I don't think is the solution. Day zero, yes, it's coming, but we need to be prepared and come with innovative solutions for that challenge because it's coming.
Yeah, maybe just a comment in terms of net zero and the zero emissions as well. I think the key thing is net zero is less stringent than the zero emissions. Zero emissions is actually more difficult, whereas net zero it talks of more like decarbonation, where you take off the carbon, like you are releasing carbon. Currently, when you talk of the processes that are happening within the core industry, and if they look at it as the maybe resulting in significant emissions, the net zero aspect, it will be talking about projects probably within a core industry that are meant to suck out carbon, right? So maybe you are using power that is from coal-fired power stations. Suppose you are using, for argument's sake, 100 megawatts, and you are also going to do renewables that relates to the same maybe 100 megawatts. That would be a positive project. So I'm also just wondering, in terms of insurance, if a coal mine is doing projects that are meant to be in line with reducing carbon emissions, is that not insured? I am not sure whether the insurers are saying we are not insuring everything 100%, or they are saying they can insure projects within the coal mines if those projects are meant to reverse the emissions that they feel they are being fed into the atmosphere by those coal mines. So I think it's something maybe to look at it and say, all the projects, are they not insured, or you can insure projects that are meant to reverse the carbon emissions?
No, I think look on those projects they are insured, but I think there is a huge appetite and in recognition to really to the challenge that the region faces. So any new renewable, any underwriter, it will be very much happy to underwrite and write any renewable risk, either through project or once it's in operation. And that as well, even to ourselves, because as well we have to balance our book because our reliance, our exposure to fossil fuel or coal is massive. So it is in our interest to have that balance on our book to write renewable risks so that we have a balanced book. And yes, gradually, as and when is appropriate, then continue to reduce as well. But for now, we don't have the requirement to reduce. But I mean, we're just looking forward, looking to the future. We may see that coming our way too, where we'll probably have to reduce. But then, if you have a substantial renewable book, then your requirement to reduce might be different than if you heavily involved or on your right fossil fuel.
Okay, thank you so much, Vicente. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to just welcome Mr. Lemogelang Ebineng to give us a vote of thanks. Just to give you a background before he comes up here. Lemogelang is a retirement fund specialist and supports the consulting team where required. He boasts immense institutional knowledge and experience of most registered pension schemes, including those that were incepted by him. He oversees all welfare and trust administration schemes, as well as our group risk benefit division. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Botswana, plus a PGDE, a certificate of proficiency in retirement funds, and has over 20 years experience in the industry. I would like to welcome, ladies and gentlemen, our MD for Retirement Solutions, Mr. Lemogelang Ebineng. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose a program that begins, has to end. But I believe with a positive note of many more programs that we will share ahead, or will celebrate together ahead. I mean, judging from the interaction, the healthy interactions of today, I can only say I've never sat through a gathering where I got fed such plethora of information. I was struggling really to get my head around the information that was coming from all angles. And normally this is we are a corporate environment, and I know it doesn't normally happen like this, but I'm just going to boldly break the custom and then just thank the God Almighty for having sent us through the day. And again, I'd like to refer to the interactions that we've had today. They were quite healthy, and for that, I can only thank the one above. It will be, of course, in order that we end the program with a vote of thanks, appreciation, and gratitude to those that made this event, a resounding success. And probably my question to Mike, I haven't asked any question, was, is there any chance that we will have such interactions again? I mean, looking at the attendance today, I still believe, the attendance could have been better, and a whole lot of people would have really benefited. But you don't have to answer it. So, yeah. Yes. Like I said, I just in order, but of no importance really. This is how I'm going to name the people that I feel ought to be recognized. I am going to start with the first one, the gentleman Tyrelle Correa, who joined us online. His presentation gave us hope that since most of us will continue to depend on coal to bring light into our homes, they will continue to provide some degree of underwriting. And then, of course, to Albert, Lee, and Tiani, I've had several takeaways from your presentation, and I know our clients who understand their needs better in in the aspect of what you presented. They've heard you very well, and with the assistance from our local experts from Minet, we will be at the ready to come in whenever you shout, especially, like I said, having listened to the three gentlemen. To the trio, your support is greatly appreciated as we continue our association into the future. We found it fit to wake up in the middle of the night in Joburg and fly into our, into our little dusty town